Hello, I'm meteorologist Don Luehrs, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Weather Awareness. Well, obviously things look a little bit different today than your usual show. We're sitting here in WPDE's ABC 15 studio with Ed Poitrowski. Ed Poitrowski, a longtime friend and, of course, a longtime meteorologist. Ed, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Don. It's an honor to be here with you. You're the first guy I ever watched when I came to Myrtle Beach. And we've been friends for, gosh, almost 30 years now, huh?
I know. I was thinking back about that on the drive over here to see you, and I was thinking back to my years at my station was 19 years, but you've eclipsed that by many, many years.
27 now here in
awesome.
Myrtle Beach. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's awesome.
I'm glad I still have a job, I guess.
Well, that's one of the things I want to talk about a little bit first as we get started. The importance of community trust for a TV meteorologist. Obviously, the meteorology part starts with the forecasting and everything else as far as the expertise, but the end game is the communication back to the people using that information. And you can't do that without trust. How did you go about that? I know you have it tremendously now because you've been in this market for such a long time and people have grown to trust you. But how does that trust build?
You know what, just over time, it's to me being honest with your viewers, letting them know when you know something, when you don't know something, just being transparent. I think when you do that, people over time begin to trust you, especially if you can get the forecast right. You know how that goes.
Exactly.
You're not exactly going to have a whole lot of trust if you're getting the forecast wrong. And you being somebody who's been in the business for many years understands how important it is to be honest with your viewers and transparent, especially in this day and age. With so much hype and sensationalism out there, I think it's important to be that way and keep people calm and be the voice of reason.
That's exactly right, and I know the day-to-day forecast is real important. You build trust slowly over those events, but the big events, the snowstorms, the hurricanes, the severe weather outbreaks, that's where you really build the trust because that's a long-lasting memory in the folks you're talking to. How do you handle that part of the situation with the uncertainty you already mentioned?
You know, to me, there are 10 Super Bowls a year. And you know what I mean by that? There are 10 huge weather events a year that you're going to make all the difference in the world. That's when people are mostly watching, and they really want to know what's going to happen in their area. And for me, anyway, it's just important, as I mentioned, to be very honest with them and let them know as these events are coming our way, when we'll know what they need to do in terms of preparing and be ready for whatever those impacts may be. I can tell you there's a hurricane coming, but you really want to know how much rain, whether or not I'm going to flood. You want to know how high the winds are going to be, whether or not trees will come down. So we try to, based, with our experience, be able to paint that picture for people at home. And as you well know, as I mentioned, sensationalism runs rampant in the national media.
It does.
So we like to keep it local and be the voice of reason as best we can. And again, I'll say it over and over, be honest with your viewers.
Another part of it, I think, from my experience, was also getting to one-on-one almost know the community.
Yes.
We did a lot of community events. I know you do the same thing. Schools were always huge as far as my community outreach and adult groups like civic clubs and so forth.
Right.
How important is that to you?
I think it's huge. When I first got here, I would start visiting schools, and this is a tribute to you, the amount of people that would say to me, hey, do you know Don? Because you've been in their community, you went to their event, you emceed their event, whatever it may be. So I knew coming in that was a very important part of the job, is to get involved with the community, and I absolutely love it, and I'm sure you did as well. It's neat to meet the people that watch you, and you also feel like you're using your position to make a difference in somebody's life and have a positive impact.
That's right. It makes it a little different when you're actually in front of the camera.
Right.
You almost feel like you're talking to individuals that way because you know kind of who you're talking to as well. One thing I remember as far as our relationship is some of the hurricane conferences we would go to,
right,
and even the local conferences. Remember the Surfside Beach seminars back when they were just kind of new? And
Jan used to put that one together.
Exactly. Jan loved the fact that we would come and help support her in the Surfside Fire Department and all that. Those type of events, I think, really paid off too, as far as having people trust us. And for that matter, back when I was on the air and you were on the air, obviously there was some competition there because of the stations being competitors. But as far as the meteorology end, I don't think either one of us ever really felt any competition per se.
No, and you see it all over the country. There's promos on television stations where they're bashing each other and so on and so forth. I was very fortunate when I got here that you were very kind to me, and we developed a great friendship, and our common goal was just to protect the people that we served. We didn't care about the ratings. As long as our checks didn't bounce, we were pretty happy about life in general.
Let's switch gears a little bit to hurricanes specifically. I have a lot of people that trust me still during a hurricane because of all the years I was on TV, and they see me on the corner, or they see me in the store, or they see me anywhere, they say, what do you think about this or that? So even though I'm day to day not working in weather right now, I do this show, of course, but it's recorded and airs monthly. The questions still come about hurricanes, and I wanted to go through some of the particulars to let them hear it from you on your intake on this, or take on this. When a hurricane is in the forecast, not even really a threat yet, what should people be doing at that point?
Most importantly, just pay attention. And every day, get updated. We all know how things can quickly change during hurricane season. I think the 4 Category 5 hurricanes that have hit the U.S. just 3 days prior to landfall were tropical storms. So things can escalate very quickly. And don't watch on Monday and say, oh, it's just going to be a tropical storm, and wait till Friday to realize it's going to be a Category 3. So always stay updated. All we can do is broad brush 7 to 10 days out, give you an idea of where it could be headed. Nobody knows what the impacts are going to be or who's going to get hit. But as it gets closer, you start to fine-tune that forecast, and then you get to describe what the impacts are eventually going to be.
And when people are getting to the point where they should start making some preparations, who should be doing what? The folks watching this show are living in Marion County and Dillon County. So they're not going to be evacuating away from a storm surge, but they do have lots of preparations to make.
Absolutely.
2 or 3 days out, looks like it's probably going to be a substantial threat. What should they be doing then?
At that point, get your hurricane kits ready. As you mentioned, you're not going to have to evacuate, but we've all been through quite a few hurricanes here in recent years, so you have an idea of what kind of flooding can occur in your neighborhood, what the winds are capable of. So get prepared for that. Clean up the stuff outside, make sure that everything is inside, that you have nothing near windows, that if the windows break, that it soaks it with rainfall or what have you. So just know your history and be prepared several days ahead of time to put those preparations into place so that you're ready before the hurricane ever gets here.
And there's some things you can do even ahead of that point. Actually, not could do, but should do ahead of that point. Like during the quiet period, the hurricane season is about to start. We have a sponsor of this show, Green Leaf Tree Service, and Robbie Miller, the owner of that company, and I were talking, and he was saying sometimes after the storm, there's a case he's working on cleaning up, and people would say, I always thought I should have taken that tree down, that type thing. So in the quiet period, before the storm season even comes, if you have trees that can come down that looks like there might be a problem, leaning against the house, brushing the house on a normal day, take them down, clean out rain ditches. We've had huge amounts of flooding with hurricanes, especially in Marion County and Dillon County. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but there's things that you can do to kind of mitigate your damage at least somewhat.
I wish people would prepare more. I mean, you've made some incredibly very valid points that now's the time to prepare when there's nothing going on. Don't be like the 95% of people who are going to wait and be frustrated with they can't find the supplies they need. Don't wait for that time to come. Now's the time to get prepared. I've never heard anybody say, I wish I would have prepared less. Much better to over-prepare than under-prepare.
I still, like I said, warn people about storms now. I even send out emails with our company, Agape Care, when we have a storm coming, because we're a statewide company, and they want to know. One time after a storm event, I went out and took a picture of the umbrella in my backyard near the pool, blown over with the table shattered, and said, I warned everybody, but I didn't listen to my own self.
Listen to yourself, Don. You know what you're talking about.
Exactly right. Going back to the flooding issues, we had 2 huge hurricanes in Marion County and Dillon County, for that matter, with Matthew and Florence. Those storms weren't huge wind destruction storms, but they were huge flood destruction storms. And that's something that PD, including Dillon and Marion counties, obviously can experience. How often do you hear people still talk about Nichols and what Nichols has gone through?
Quite often, especially when I do a speech across the PD or on the border belt. Of course, with coronavirus last year, so you haven't been able to do too much of that, but people always reference hurricanes, I want to say Michael, but not Michael, Matthew, and of course Hurricane Florence, because of the catastrophic flooding. And in Nichols in particular, I think 95% of that city went underwater with Hurricane Matthew.
It was just utterly amazing. If you had property in Nichols, chances are you were flooded. We do have a coworker that lives there, and her property is thankfully on high enough ground that she wasn't, but nothing she relied on was there anymore. Stores, gas stations, everything.
It's the two hurricanes people will talk about for a long time. We hope that, you know, the next time we get a hurricane, that it's not going to be anything like that. And because when you and I were doing this together, Hurricane Floyd was the benchmark hurricane in 1999, and we went all those years before we had these massive rain producers.
Right. Hurricane Floyd flooding was bad enough in South Carolina, but North Carolina even worse.
Yeah.
So it's amazing what a storm can do. And for that matter, when I was a little kid, I think it was Agnes, 1972.
Yeah, I remember
not even a hurricane, a tropical storm. And by the time it was causing its damage, it was remnants of a tropical storm parked over Pennsylvania and New York. And it just goes to show you, every system is different, the threats are different, and people don't need to pay too much attention to rank or category or things like that.
Categories are strictly for wind. Let's be honest about that. And there's so many more hazards and impacts, the rain, the tornadoes, the storm surge, whatever it may be. I wasn't here, but you were in the business 1989 when Hugo came through.
I started at BTW in '88, so that was kind of my introduction to living through the hurricane.
What an introduction. And so, I mean, if you don't mind, describe what it was like to be on television during that time, because that's really the biggest hurricane to hit us.
Well, interestingly enough, I had never been on air. I had a long career in meteorology up to that point, but I had never been on air serving a market.
Wow.
I had my background at AccuWeather and the Weather Channel only as a forecaster, not as a presenter. So television was new to me, and I had forecasted lots of hurricanes, especially with AccuWeather, but never at the actual focal point of where the storm was going. I was calling in forecasts from somewhere else for people that were going through it in another location.
Right.
So it's totally different. I remember before the storm, even internally within the station, Vanessa Hill was one of our anchors back then, and she came up because I've been giving the word out for a couple of days now, and I was getting a bit more dire as time went by, and she said, "Don, it's going to be really bad, isn't it?" And I didn't lie to her. I said, "Yeah, Vanessa, it's going to be bad. It's really going to be bad." And we went through kind of things, that, you know, what we were just talking about, what you can do to mitigate your damage and so forth. So that was different. A good friend of mine, I think you were Stu Ostro.
Yes.
He was just starting his career at the Weather Channel. He wanted to come and see a hurricane. So I asked him, or he asked me rather, if he could stay in the townhouse I rented in Surfside Beach, because I lived in Surfside Beach at that time, and I was doing the hurricane coverage from Florence, our studio. And I remember calling him about 18 hours before landfall and said, "Stu, I really don't want you to be in my house during the hurricane because I don't want to be responsible for anything that happens to you.
Right.
You really need to rethink and retreat." So he came back to Florence for the actual storm. But it was a remarkable. And then, of course, it hit at night. So the damage you knew was going on, but you didn't know exactly what it looked like.
Right.
So when the sun came up the next morning and everything was so destructed, it was just amazing. And I lived in Surfside Beach, so when I could make my way back down there, it was even another eye-opener.
Was your place okay?
My place was fine. It was right one block toward the beach from Business 17.
Wow.
But the flooding and the storm surge, the true destruction was about maybe 3 or 4 blocks in from the water. So I was fine, actually, maybe a few shingles off the roof, and that was it. But the ocean front was devastated. Then you go a little farther south into Garden City, it just gets worse and worse. So that was probably the barometer that a lot of people still measure storms by.
Sure.
But now I think you've seen, since you've been in Myrtle Beach and along the Grand Strand, the growth of the beach.
Oh, yeah.
If a Hugo came now, I can't imagine the dollar amount of what that damage would be.
That and, you know, another one like Hurricane Hazel in 1954. I mean, either one of those hitting today would cause magnitudes higher in terms of damage, just because, as you said, so many more people living by the beach, so much more stuff down by the beach. And Hugo was basically a wind and storm surge machine,
right?
Whereas the Florences and Matthews of the world were basically rain machines. So, like you said, completely different hurricanes, but the end result was catastrophe created by different elements of a hurricane.
Exactly right. So let's go back to where we were kind of traveling before about the steps toward a hurricane, what people should be doing. We talked some about way before, like in the quiet period, and a few days before. Now we're at 24 hours. It's coming. Get ready. At that point, I guess it's getting your family together, making sure everyone's where you think they're going to be, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, and have everything charged up. These days we all have these phones, so
Exactly.
make sure they're charged up because power could be lost for quite a long time. Be prepared. Have water if you're staying at your house. Be prepared that if there are trees knocked down, it may take several days for law enforcement or help to get to where you are. You've got to basically be prepared to be on your own for a solid 3 days. So make sure you have plenty of food and water that's non-perishable food. This whole bread and milk thing, I just don't get it,
Yes, I say it happened during COVID too, with the toilet paper and everything else. So it's amazing that the runs that can happen on a store, but getting that stuff kind of set aside ahead of time can be helpful.
Yes.
And just knowing everything you're going to need to do, so you're not thinking your plan out, you're executing your plan.
Absolutely. And also remember that the statistics from the National Hurricane Center show that more people on average die after the storm because people are unaware of the live power lines, whatever it may be, fires that are ongoing, people, carbon monoxide poisoning just from starting generators inside. The most important thing you can do is never start a generator inside. So just remember all those little things, and you follow those simple rules. Nobody should ever die in a hurricane, quite frankly.
You're right. You should be somewhere safe.
Plenty of time to get wherever you need to be.
Exactly. I remember folks that lived through South Florida and Hurricane Andrew, and even without all this destruction, fatalities from the wind were very minimal.
Right.
I'm not saying there were none, but they were, compared to what you would imagine, they were minimal. And that's because folks on air were talking folks through climbing in the bathtub, pulling a mattress
Right.
things like that. So if you're in a secure building, chances are you're going to be okay.
Right.
But you want to be somewhere more appropriate than a flood-prone area. You mentioned the aftermath of a hurricane and the fact that so many people are injured or even killed in the aftermath. That's one thing people don't really think about. They think the storm's over, I'm going to go out, get these trees off my driveway,
Right.
be able to drive the car out, and maybe they never operated a chainsaw before.
Exactly.
Or they haven't done it for 10 years.
And it's very stressful too. I mean, a lot of senior citizens get out there, they're stressed because of what's just happened, and you're going out to try to clean up your property, and as you and I both know, it's incredibly hot and humid a lot of times after a hurricane,
Exactly.
which just causes heat exhaustion, and for some people, that can lead to death if you're not real careful.
Right, and I think that's important for the on-air people to remember, because the messaging isn't over when the hurricane's over.
Absolutely.
It has to go on for a few more days to get people through that stage as well.
Yes, exactly.
Very good. Well, let's take a short break, and
Okay.
we'll be right back after this. If you are in the market for a car, truck, or SUV, you have to check out Parker's Used Cars. Parker's Used Cars is on Highway 38 South in Blenheim, located between Latta and Bennettsville. Tommy Parker, the owner, has built his reputation by selling high-quality vehicles for 29 years. You won't believe the selection. You'll have over 600 cars, trucks, and SUVs to pick from. Check them out online at parkersautos.com. That's parkersautos.com. Or call them at 843-528-3301. Parker's Used Cars in Blenheim, Highway 38. Storm season is here, and every year brings with it a risk of a storm that will bring down trees, knock out power, and cause lots of damage. This time of year brings with it the risk of tropical storms and hurricanes, and every year has its share of thunderstorms with lightning strikes and blown down limbs. Well, you can't control the weather, but there are things you can do to reduce your risk of damage. Probably the best thing you can do to protect your property is to take down any problem trees ahead of time and trim and clean up the trees you want to keep. Greenleaf Tree Service is ready to help. The experts at Greenleaf Tree Service will come out and assess your property for trees that could be a danger, remove the trees you want gone, and do any trimming and cleaning needed for the trees you like. All with top-notch professionalism and all at a great price. In fact, there's no charge for Greenleaf Tree Service to come out and give you an estimate. Call Greenleaf Tree Service today at 843-845-1918. And don't be the one wishing you had when the hurricane hits. Call Greenleaf Tree Service today. That number again, 843-845-1918. And remember, if a storm does hit, Greenleaf Tree Service is ready to help clean up any tree damage too. Save that number, 843-845-1918. And welcome back. Lots of talk about hurricanes before the break, Ed, but I want to switch gears and talk about something completely different, and that is snowstorms. I kind of miss them because we don't seem to have them too often right now. But every once in a while we do get a snowstorm. When I first moved here, people were still talking about the 1970s and the big snowstorm centered on Darlington and Florence. But we had a few during my time, nothing more than I think maybe about 10 or 9 inches in most locales. But one year, 1989, the same year as Hugo, we had this a record-shattering storm at the beach. We had, I think, 13 to 14 inches of snow.
Exactly, at Myrtle Beach.
It was incredible. And I, like I said, lived at Surfside at that time, so it was utterly amazing. Talk a little bit about how people react when snow is in the forecast.
You know, for the most part, people fear hurricanes. They don't really fear snowstorms. But here in the South, they can be deadly as well. So you still need to be prepared. You can lose power.
Certainly disruption, yeah.
Absolutely. You lose power. You know, driving is very difficult as well. We hear it all the time, but really Southerners are not as good at driving on snow as we are preparing for a hurricane, I guess. So it's always important to be prepared for those as well. Understand that, you know, things can change, power lines can come down, trees can come down with the snow as well, and especially if we have ice storms. Those are the absolute worst. So always remember that you need to be prepared for those as well. Even though they're fun to look at, snowstorms can be deadly.
Yeah, and as far as the weather forecasting angle as a meteorologist, I always felt the pressure during a hurricane because you're warning people and trying to get it right. But I really felt the need to be right during snow because nothing's worse than forecasting snow and then waking up the next day and nothing's happened.
Gosh. They'll drag you through the streets.
They will.
They really will.
They will.
You can miss a hurricane because they're like, okay, it wasn't as bad. But if you miss a snowstorm, the kids and the parents, like, you said it was going to do this, and it happens. It's the nature of this business.
It does. For sure. And if you get one right, it can kind of be your ticket for a long time.
Right.
I remember I got one right real early when I started here. Tom Searles was still the meteorologist here. And I got it right. And then a few months later, I really blew a weekend forecast. I had promised nice weather, and it turned out that it was not so nice. It was rainy. And I was coming into work, I was thinking, man, people are going to be mad because I got the forecast wrong. And I walked in kind of ready for a little bit of ribbing, and someone tried it. They said, "Oh, nice weekend we had. There wasn't a ton." And I heard from the back the director say, "But he got the snow right."
That's the help
so
you
I
need.
still catch that in a little bit.
You're only as good as your last forecast is what I say often.
Exactly. One big topic that is in the news a lot, of course, related to weather is climate change. I get asked a lot about, what do you think about climate change? Is it responsible for all the severe weather we're experiencing, especially if there's weather in the news? How do you handle that question? What's your response to that?
It's tough. You know, we don't know 100% guaranteed what is causing things. I don't believe that climate change alone is causing any one particular event. What it can do is make extreme events even more extreme. You think about Hurricane Florence or Hurricane Matthew. When the globe is warming, the jet stream slows down, which means your steering currents aren't as strong, so your hurricanes move slower. And Hurricane Florence came through Horry County as a tropical storm, yet it dumped 24 inches of rain because it was moving at 2 miles per hour. So it can make some events worse, is probably the way I'll put it. And there are long-term studies that suggest that if the globe were to continue to warm, we'd have increasing wind shear, and despite a warmer ocean, there would be fewer storms moving forward. So that's not such a bad thing.
Exactly. And one thing I always point out to people is the weather for millennium has gone through cycles.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes you're in an active cycle, sometimes you're in a less active cycle. So when you're in the active cycle, it's easy to point fingers and try to figure it out. But a lot of what's going on, I remember Dr. Gray used to talk about this a lot at those hurricane conferences we referenced. For folks watching, Dr. Gray was the one that was so responsible for kind of the initiation of long-range hurricane forecasting and Colorado State forecast that is still listened to so much with Phil Klotzbach. But he used to say there's so much chaos in the atmosphere that he didn't think that the global warming, as it was called then, could be as responsible for things as people are trying to weigh on it for. And I kind of still agree with that. I think there's so many cycles and so much energy in the atmosphere anyway, that there's probably some influence, and we don't really know how much, but it's not the driver that people make it out to be.
You know, and I agree in that whether you believe it or not, the bottom line is we should all be good stewards of the earth.
Exactly.
Keep it clean, do what we can do to make this an inhabitable place for, you know, hundreds of years to come. So, you know, when it comes to hurricanes, If there is a link, it is hopefully fewer storms moving forward. The rainfall events, that's the one thing I've gotten out of the whole climate change debate, is that rainfall is more intense. You get bigger amounts of rainfall because it's kind of pushed to the envelope because of how slow systems actually move. So, and even when it comes to intensity, I've seen the latest research that says even if the climate is warming, regardless of who causes it, it is warming. But people debate
and ocean
who is
levels
causing
are slowly increasing.
Right. So you're going to have more flooding, and obviously more rainfall. So, but the intensities only increase about 5 to 10%. As you and I both know, 5 or 10% stronger hurricane, you can't measure that. So whether it's a 100-mile-per-hour hurricane or 110, you can't tell the difference in damage done by that. So that is statistically insignificant, that part of it.
Right. Well, thanks for joining us for the show today. I really do appreciate it, and congratulations on the career you've built here.
Thank you very much, Don, and I can't thank you enough for everything you did to lay the path for me. It's been phenomenal 27 years for me, but I always remember the beginning years that we were great friends then, and we still are today. Thank you. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Ed. Very good. And thank you for watching this edition of Weather Awareness. Join us again next time.